You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 240, Grief versus Getting Over Your Ex. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Welcome, Braveheart. I'm so excited you're here to listen to the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast. This is the Netflix of breakups, short, powerful, and actionable episodes that help you along your breakup journey. If you're interested in a more hands-on approach, I'd love to invite you to check out our free on-demand video training called How to Fast Forward Getting Over Your Ex Without Wasting Months or Years Feeling Jealous, Angry, or Unlovable. You'll learn how to stop letting your ex live rent-free in your mind, even if you want to get back together later, how to absolutely be sure that your life will be better than the one that you had with your ex post-breakup without it taking time, and lastly, the secret to feeling completely neutral about your ex without having to go no contact. Grab it for free at breakupcoachdorothy.com. Let's begin the episode. Hello, beautiful Bravehearts. Today I am feeling inspired. I invested, excited about what I do, and I don't feel like this every day. And lately I've been feeling like this new, fresh feeling of, it reminds me of when I just started my business again, and it feels so good and it makes me happy and giddy, and I'm obsessed. So I hope you're doing well today. I wanted to talk about grief and getting over your ex and the differences between the two because I do think they're different. But before we get started, I want to let you know that today is the first day to save your spot in the live 5-day How to Get Over Your Ex training. We will accomplish 5 months of healing in just 5 days. You get to come spend 5 whole days with me and other Bravehearts who are eager to take what they're learning here on the podcast and actually implement these tools into their life and their breakup journey so that they can fast forward getting over their ex. Your freedom from your ex is super worth just 5 days of your time. It's completely free of charge. We're going to have 5 days together and you won't be in the same place as you are right now. I promise. All right. So you can save your spot at dorothyabjohnson.com/5-day live training, which I've also linked in the show notes. All right. So today we are talking about what I said of grief versus getting over your ex. I actually recently graduated from an advanced grief certification with one of my favorite coaches, Krista St. Germain, who works with widowed moms. And one of the biggest concepts I had a realization about while going through that was the difference between grief versus getting over something. Because I talk a lot, obviously, about getting over your ex, and I think they're different. And here's where this all kind of started. I went through a miscarriage back in November of 2022 of 13 weeks. I was really searching for solutions on how do I get over this? And I really wanted a coach who was a clone of me. I wanted a coach who had a get over your, not a get over your ex. I say that so many times that it's ingrained in my brain. A get over your miscarriage in 3 months or less program. That is what I wanted. I wanted steps. In the Get Over Your Ex program, you know exactly what you're doing, when you're doing it, and it moves you through different activities and exercises that help you process the grief, that help you move through building a relationship with yourself. And we also have the ability to, anticipate things that perhaps if you've never gone through a breakup before, you don't even know are going to arise. And so I had never gone through this I had an ectopic pregnancy once, but it was so different than this miscarriage. And so I had never gone through a miscarriage to this capacity before. And I wanted someone who's going to anticipate those things for me, who had a process, who walked multiple people through this same sort of thing. And in my search of different processes and tools, I heard a lot of this idea that this is something you'll never get over. And to me, as a breakup coach, as someone who helps people get over their ex, I was like, hearing that to me was just not inspiring or it didn't feel good. And I understand that for some people it does feel good because it comforts them in a way. It reminds them like this isn't something you have to get over. And I honor that. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, that was just not the case. This was like a non-negotiable for me. I wanted to get over this. I wanted to move through this, and I wanted to move past this. I wanted to come to peace and acceptance. So I want to get over my miscarriage, and that didn't mean I wanted to forget about it or forget the baby I had created up to the 13 weeks or be insensitive, but I did believe that there was a process that could help me move through that experience and find peace around it and release my attachment and the graspiness that I could tell I had around needing a baby after having a loss. So in my search, I never found a coach that was the clone or the replica of myself. I found coaches who coached on moving through miscarriage, but none of them had like a proven process like the Get Over Your Ex program. So in classic Dorothy fashion, I did all the things. I learned what didn't work. I learned what did work, and I made my own process, and it was fucking powerful. And so when I started this advanced grief certification, I spent a lot of time actually using miscarriage and child loss and parental loss as part of the studies that I have with grief. And of course, I'm looking at heartbreak and breakups and applying it to that and to my clients and all of the things, but that had already been happening. But this new layer of miscarriage and child loss and parental loss that I was exploring and I'm implementing in a lot of different ways was really interesting. And what I found in my research and my studies in this world of miscarriage was this idea of there's, something you'll never get over. It's not something you get over. And many people really subscribe to that. And that's amazing, like I said, because it helps them, it comforts them. So that's great. If it's working for you, amazing. But for me, it left me feeling helpless. It felt similar to the idea of it just takes time when it comes to getting over an ex, where it's like, okay, so then I just wait and then this will be something that never changes for me. It was disheartening, I guess is the word. That just wasn't what I wanted. So I started to look at why people were saying that. And a lot of it was based around grief and how grief can pop up and come up in a lot of different ways. And there truly is no timeline around grief and no right way of experiencing grief. So I found this fascinating and really relatable to the Get Over Your Ex, theme and concept, right? And if you've ever listened to episode 22, we talk about the grief bubble. And what happened was, 4 years post my breakup, I witnessed my ex getting married and I had a lot of grief come up around that. And so we created this concept of the grief bubble, and I share that with you. And what was fascinating about that whole thing was it didn't mean that I wasn't over my ex, but it did mean that I had a wave of grief that I was experiencing, and that was okay. And ultimately, I wanted to come on and I wanted to talk to you today and share that this main kind of line here is that you can be over your ex and still experience grief. Grief and processing grief is a part of the getting over your ex process. It's a part of getting over your ex, but being over your ex doesn't mean you'll never experience grief again. And I would say the same is true for myself. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I'm speaking for myself with my process of the miscarriage. I keep grief and I keep being over my miscarriage as separate things. Grief was a part of getting over my miscarriage, and grief can still appear. So here's why I say that. Here's why I say that you can experience grief and still be over your ex. And the reason why is that there are so many forms of grief, my friends. I want to talk about a couple of them. There are so many different forms of grief. There's so many different names for grief. And I think it's really powerful to look at some specifics around it so that you can understand for yourself, is it that I'm not over my ex, or is it that I'm just experiencing grief? Can I be over my ex and allow and make space for grief when it does appear? So the most common form of grief that I personally see in the work that I do with bravehearts who are getting over their ex, and I see it pop up a lot after, it happens during, of course, But after someone's done the work of being over their ex, I see this form pop up. Because as a reminder, being over your ex looks different for everybody, right? It could mean that you have zero desire and zero attachment for your ex, or you think about your ex less and are no longer constantly ruminating about that person, and that means you're over your ex. Or perhaps you can finally go to like places that you've been avoiding since the breakup, or you just feel lighter and you smile about life again. You decide what being over your ex means to you, but separate the grief from getting over something. Just like I expect, and I have seen grief pop up around my miscarriage, and I would say I've gotten over my miscarriage and it feels really good to me. I love it. To me, being over my miscarriage is no longer being at the effect of baby Marilyn being in or not in my life, and I'm building my bigger and better life regardless of whether or not she's physically here with me, and I've got zero attachment to her, which feels so much better than feeling attached to someone who is no longer in my life. So, back to the most common form of grief I see my Bravehearts experience after they've done the work of getting over their ex is something called secondary loss. This is defined as subsequent losses resulting from a primary loss, such as loss of identity, financial stability, or social networks. Of course, those kinds of losses are happening, those secondary losses are happening while you're in the midst of grieving and getting over your breakup and getting over your ex. But this can also hit so randomly after you've done the work of reducing desire and attachment. I just had an alumni call, which we do quarterly, and I had a Braveheart talk about a wave of grief that popped up because her child was graduating college and she thought her ex would be there, right? Or care about it. And it was something that when they were together, they had talked about, he was super supportive of, but when she texted him to let him know about the graduation, she was left with no response. And so a wave of grief just hit her. And I would say that that was secondary loss. And here's the thing. When that wave of grief comes up, it doesn't mean that she's not over this person. It simply means something didn't go as expected. She expected he'd be there for this event and this important milestone, and he wasn't. And that's okay. Those are two very separate things. It doesn't mean that she still desires him or feels attached to him. It just means that the grief does appear, and keep those separate. Same thing with social networks. You experience a secondary loss of not only did I lose my partner, I lost my friend group. And perhaps that wave of grief hits when there's like a get together that you didn't get invited to. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not over your ex. It means you're experiencing grief. You experienced, you expected to be invited and to be involved with these friends for your whole life. And now you're realizing you're not. And it doesn't mean that you want to get back together with your ex. It doesn't mean you have a bunch of desire for or a bunch of attachment to your ex. It just means the grief was there. Another form of grief that is relevant here, I personally see, is ambivalent grief, which is defined as grieving when the relationship with the deceased, which if someone passes, right? But when you're talking about a breakup, grieving when the relationship with the person who left or you left was complex or conflicted, right? Leading to mixed emotions. And so this could be when your ex is well liked by a lot of people or by the outside world, but to you, perhaps they were emotionally or verbally abusive or just like not a kind person to you. Or maybe they cheated. Think about how complicated that grief can feel. You're confused as to why you have mixed feelings because you're like, this person created so much discomfort and yet I want this person to comfort me. And I notice that this comes up in scenarios where perhaps a friend brings up how great of a guy your ex is or something big, that he or she is being acknowledged for, and you experience this form of grief because not that you're not over this person, you don't have desire for, you don't feel attached to this person anymore. You aren't constantly thinking about this person, but perhaps a wave of grief hits you when there's something big that happens for them. You don't desire them, you're not feeling attached for them in the future, but you have this wave of grief hit you, and then you've got this wave of mixed emotion. Another one I want to talk about is delayed grief or retrospective grief, and that is defined as grief reactions that are postponed or delayed, surfacing long after the actual loss or triggered by subsequent events. What? This is a big one, okay? Just because you're having grief reactions doesn't necessarily mean you're not over this person. Now, if you haven't done the work to get over your ex, 1000%, you can be not over someone and grieving. Like I said, grief is a part of the getting over your ex process. So if you're in the midst of it and this is happening, that's one thing. But if you've truly done the work, and where I see my clients get to of like, I've got zero desire, zero attachment, I'm going back to the places that I was avoiding, I'm no longer constantly ruminating and thinking about this person, and they still experience grief, I am not concerned about them not being over their ex. I am concerned about them just remembering to process the grief and allow that to come through. You do not have to make feeling grief mean you're not over someone. And here's the thing, Bravehearts, I could go on. This could be like a million different episodes here of all the different forms of grief. I could talk through so many examples, but I just want to leave you with one more that I think I want you to acknowledge in case it's happening for you, okay? This is unacknowledged grief. And that's defined as grief that is not recognized or acknowledged by others, leading to feelings of isolation and unsupported mourning. So this reminds me of all of my Bravehearts who potentially are getting over an ex that the ex is actually someone they were having an affair with. This is a really sticky spot to be in because you might be trying to save your marriage, but you're also like mourning the loss of this person you were having an affair with. And I've helped many individuals through scenarios like this, and this grief can and will come up when you're trying to save your marriage. And when things go wrong with your marriage partner, I see grief pop up about the other person because you're thinking about how it might have been different. And just because you feel that grief, again, if you've done the processing and you've actually worked through the whole program and you've reduced desire and attachment and you're over this person, but just because you feel that grief doesn't mean you're not over your affair partner. Or if something maybe perhaps big happens for that person that you had the affair with, and like they got a job, and maybe you two talked about it for a long time, a wave of grief comes up, because you thought you'd be there with them for that. And that's almost like a secondary loss and unacknowledged grief combined because it's not acknowledged. You're not supposed to have that, quote unquote, supposed to, right? Because it's perceived as negative by so many people in the world. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't over that person. Allow that grief to pop up and recognize my marriage is still strong. This doesn't mean I'm not over this person. It just means like, at one point in my life, I had this expectation and that expectation did not happen. And again, I'm saying all of this, you guys, with the pretense that as long as you've done the work to get over them, right? Like if you haven't done the work to get over them, then yes, grief is a part of the process. You're in the midst of it. You're in the thick of it. You're not over your ex and you're also grieving. But once you've done all of this work and you've gotten over your ex because you've defined what it is, you know what the outcome is, and you know that you've accomplished it and you've created that, then when grief comes up, I don't make that mean I'm not over this person or I'm not over this situation. Now, here's why I'm sharing all of this and why I'm kind of sharing the difference between grief versus getting over your ex and why it's important to you, is that grief comes and goes. We will experience grief all throughout our lifetime. And if we make experiencing grief mean that we aren't over something, we will never actually be over things. Kind of like the concept that I noticed a lot of in the miscarriage kind of realm. Like, again, I understand where they're coming from, but the words and the sentences and how that is kind of taught so far to me the way that it's been shown, it wasn't working for me. I want to believe that I can be over something, that I can get over my miscarriage, that I can get over an ex, that I can get over a breakup with a job and still experience grief, and they're completely separate things. Because grief is going to be a part of your life forever. It is built into you and it will always be there. There's actually, I'll kind of leave you with this analogy, but there's this analogy with grief, and I don't know whose analogy this is. It is not mine. I'm not taking ownership of it, where they talk about and they say that grief in the beginning takes up a whole box. Like pretend a big circle is in a box, and then that circle is huge. It takes up the whole thing. It's all consuming, and that might be your grief in the beginning. And as you move through life and you collect more experiences, the box gets bigger. And so like the grief isn't getting smaller, the circle stays the same, but the box is the part that's growing to fit in all of life's experiences. And those experiences grow through the circle and it all becomes a part of the box as the box expands and gets bigger and better. And I think that's a beautiful way of explaining the grief and how it can be held. And that can be separate from realizing I no longer want to be with this person. I no longer have desire for this person. I no longer feel attached to having them in my life to create everything that I want. I have a good life. I'm happy. I'm living my bigger and better life. And of course, there is grief within me. And that has also helped me become me. Grief has helped you become you. Make room for it. All right. Beautiful Bravehearts, I love you so much. I hope you have an amazing day today. I love you. I love you. I wish I could hug you in person. I wish we could hang out. I hope you're having a great week. And if you do want to come hang out with me, come hang out with me for 5 days. We're going to start June 3rd. It's going to be an epic event. 5 days together. You guys, it's going to change your whole experience. And it's the beginning of the summer. Let's have a really good summer. I promise you at the end of this 5-day live training, you will not be in the same place you are today. All right. I'm going to coach you. I'm going to give you feedback on your homework. You guys, I love homework. So you're not only going to be listening to me, I'm going to give you actual steps of what to do. You're going to take it. You're going to apply it. And we're going to do giveaways because homework and applying yourself is so important. All right. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will talk to you next time. If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you'd like to learn how to fast forward getting over your ex without spending months or years feeling angry, jealous, or unlovable, I would love to personally invite you to participate in our free on-demand video training, where we share 3 mind-blowing moments that will forever change your experience with your breakup or divorce. Come check it out at breakupcoachdorothy.com.